I spent many, many years writing probably close to 1,000 bios, hundreds of magazine articles, 3 books where I focused essentially on telling people's stories. When I got back into acting about 5 years ago, I had gotten a lot of experience doing public speaking. I just realized that there was this great need for being well-spoken in public, but also the fact that I struggled a lot with it. So I worked very, very hard on my own speaking skills.
Your TED Talk was so authentic, it brings you into it. How would you talk to another entrepreneur that might be afraid of getting to that raw level of authenticity?
Do it slowly and in a way that works for you. Not everybody is as comfortable. Happiness comes from taking the focus off yourself. So if you just focus on the message, whatever it is that you want to teach others, that will naturally put you more at ease.
Lily, I saw your TED Talk, and when was that filmed?
Yeah, that was at the end of 2019,
2019, and it immediately sparked this conversation in my mind that I think early stage entrepreneurs need to understand about being on camera and about showcasing their talents through the form of video storytelling and talking about their brand. And I'd love to just hear what was it like to go through being on a TED Talk, being on the stage. What was the process like? What did you go through? And just hear about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I always tell people don't sign up to do it unless you are willing to commit, a lot of time to it. It's a very time intensive process.
Yeah.
However, one that is very gratifying. I've always felt like it was such a great and continues to be a great calling card for myself as far as, not just articulating my speaking abilities now that I've gone into media coaching, but also just, again, explaining my story in a very authentic way. So I had sort of an interesting entree into the TED Talk world. I actually wasn't really a fan of TED Talks. I wasn't super familiar with the platform and was taken by one of my subjects in my first book, the jewelry designer Judith Bright, to my first TED Talk event. And that was about 2 years before they asked me to actually do my own. And I remember at the event, she said to, one of the committee members who she ended up casually introducing me to, she said, this is Lily Clayton Hanson. She's a local author. She specializes in biographical writing. She would be excellent as far as giving a TED Talk. And nothing happened. I had reached out, I followed up, and same thing with the following year. I, again, kind of threw my name in the hat, and, again, I didn't get a response. So I figured, all right, whatever. And then the following year, when I wasn't thinking about it at all, which is how it always is, right? They actually reached out to me. I had a friend and a former client who was on the committee, and he said, hey, we had a meeting today and we had to bring up people's names who we thought would be really great speakers. And yours was a name that came up and they really loved what you do.
How long was the process between when you first applied to that them reaching back out to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we first touched base in the summer and then the whole process began in the fall. So it was relatively quick. And I had an unusual experience where I didn't really go to them with like a cut and dry idea. Like I really just, came to them and was like, this is what I do. I specialize in interviewing people and writing about their stories. And I would really love to talk about how interviewing, well over 1,000 people around the globe has touched me, on a very personal level.
Yeah. So the topic was talking to strangers or the ease of talking to strangers and how it's easier to talk to them than sometimes the people we know the best. Peel that apart. Why is it so easy for us as just humans to connect with somebody that we don't know over someone that we've built relationships with?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think about that often, because even with doing what I'm doing now, which is I move more into, media coaching and, coaching clients and how to speak. And it's a very similar process that I took to my biographical writing. I mean, I sit there, I talk to them. I mean, a lot of times they open up to me in the conversations about their lives. And I always say I'm not a therapist, but there's a therapeutic element to what I do. I think it's because perhaps there's a lack of fear of being judged, that maybe you would have, from your colleagues or your friends and family. It's kind of like how people will go and, have a couple of cocktails and open up to like a bartender or a hairdresser or something.
Very cool. Very cool. It made me think about like the genuineness part of the human connection. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to go into like a little bit about talking to a stranger, sometimes we put down our guard, and we feel more relaxed because there's nothing to gain, there's nothing to risk, right? Sometimes, and if I'm now an entrepreneur and I'm trying to promote my business, my idea, what I'm trying to build or whatever, it's that authenticity that people want to connect with. So how did you pull that? Like your TED Talk was so authentic. It brings you into it. How would you talk to another entrepreneur that might be afraid of getting to that raw level of authenticity?
Yeah, I would say, do it slowly and in a way that works for you. Not everybody is as comfortable, I guess, bearing their soul or showing their skeletons in their closet as maybe some people are. I think people that come from a creative background like myself, I tend to be a little bit more comfortable with it, because I grew up with a musician father or an artist mother. I was taught from a young age that you put your personal self into your art, and that's really what connects with, people. But I think a lot of business people are taught the opposite, which is to make it all about the service or the product. So I would say go at it slowly. For me, working with a coach was very helpful. I was comfortable with putting myself into the talk, although there were certain things that I said in it that I remember I thought, should I say this because I'm using it as kind of a business calling card? Would this come across as unprofessional? But the thing that I always found really interesting was whenever people would listen to it, the stuff that they connected with the most was when I said that I was having a hard time or I had screwed up or I was, making bad decisions at the time, because that's the stuff that people can relate to, not necessarily, you getting up on stage and bragging about all of the achievements that you've had. So I always try to remember that, me personally, I love listening to interviews with, other company founders or artists. And the stuff that I, tend to hang on to is where they struggled along the way and how they picked themselves back up.
Yeah, totally. I think, and I'm guilty of this, is I want everything to look polished, whether it's if it's my service or my website or what I'm putting out on camera. And sometimes I'm thinking that's not necessarily how I connect to people. And it's very hard. And I work with a lot of founders who want it to be perfect right out of the gate, or they won't release it until it is perfect. And I think your TED Talk does a good job. And what you're doing is let's it's okay to be not perfect. Let's be real. Let's be authentic. Let's engage with our failures, our risks, our emotions, and that's what people connect with the most. So
Oh, absolutely. I think I made that clear in my talk, or at least I tried to, which was, in a way where I still kept the focus on my subjects and I didn't make it all about me, because some interviewers do that, and I'm not a fan of that, style of interviewing. But I always would tell my subjects, that what I was going through, and I used it as a segue into my questions. And I found that even famous people, because I've interviewed a lot of, household names, they connected with that. Because again, it's you are relating to them as a person. And so I would say it's totally natural to want things to be perfect. I go through that as well. And I remember when I was practicing my TED Talk, I would say the moment that really changed everything for me was I was working with one of my acting coaches on the talk, and I almost had a panic attack when we were working on it. And she said, "What's going on? You're usually so confident. Why are you almost floating out of your body with anxiety?" And I said, "I just want this to be perfect. I want it to be right." And she said, "That's not what people connect to. They connect to
100%.
you and the message. And, as long as you keep your focus on, you want to help people, you want to convey this beautiful message, you want to touch people with your own story and what you've uniquely learned, that's really what truly matters. And that's what they're going to, again, gravitate towards, like a magnet."
Yeah, for sure. There's this also thing I want to ask you about, from a age-based demographic. I'm about to be 44, and I have noticed that the entrepreneurs that I work with that are, say, 35 and above, have this perfectionism problem, that they want everything, like you said, to look perfect. I want it to be polished and produced. Where the younger generation is very quickly to put that aside and say, let's just just be real. Let's just be authentic. And I noticed this one time when I've hired a young girl. Her name's Micah that helps me with social media and content and creativity and stuff. And she's like, "You've got the millennial pause." And I'm like, "What's the millennial pause?" And she's like, "Just Google it." And it's this pause that we as older millennials, I guess you could call us, before we like start to talk on camera, we pause. Like this is this quick second, and it's a real phenomenon. You could Google it, millennial pause, and where the younger generation, they don't have that pause. They just go right into it, and that's. I'm curious to get your take on the age demographic of this perfectionism that older demographics that hinder us from being on camera and really being our true self.
Yeah, wow. Well, I'm going to pause. That's so funny. I've never heard of that before, so thank you for enlightening me to that term. That's really interesting. I don't know. I mean, I would say I think about it a lot with stuff like TikTok, which I recently got on. I think I've got like 25 followers
Right,
or
right.
something. I haven't put much effort into it. So don't look me up on there. Look me up on Instagram. But I think that it is just the platform where, people can just kind of throw stuff out there randomly, like them talking in their car or, just like running up a hill where they're breathing heavily, delivering like a story or something. And, again, there's this appeal of watching real people, similar to like reality television, which a lot of people that are younger than us grew up on. I totally get it. I grew up, my first writing job was working with magazines. I mean, and so, I was in these very high-end editorial sort of worlds, whether it was Modern Luxury, which is a beautiful coffee table magazine, or Time Out Chicago, which is a little more low key, but still was, very well produced at the time and, like top of sort of their market. And so it was all about perfectionism and it was all about, like the image. And, similarly, I grew up, looking at supermodels and celebrities in magazines. And so I imagine it's kind of just like the content younger people are raised on. They're raised
sure.
more on real people and, people not speaking in perfect sentences or being in these like, perfectly well curated environments. So I think it's interesting with, the speaking sort of thing, because I do find that a lot, especially with like my media training clients, where it's like, especially the people that come from more of a business world, they want to project this image of success, but really in actuality, what people connect with is the human being who has gone through stuff.
You're absolutely spot on. So for those entrepreneurs or those business owners who haven't quite yet figured that out, where do you have them start? Like, what's something that they can kind of put down that mask of success to bring through that authenticity? How do you get that out of them?
Yeah, wow. Well, great question, Clay. Thank you so much for being so thoughtful in your questions. I think it comes from conversation. And, that's why I have enjoyed starting this coaching business, which you've just been so wonderful as far as not just mentoring me, but encouraging me to go after this, because I always had coaches. I even though I didn't grow up with a lot of money, my mom was a wonderful mother. And, when I was a child, actor, which I pursued pretty, seriously when I was a kid. I was like that kid that was auditioning for like television shows and stuff. She made sure that I had a coach. And so I think I get the idea of working one-on-one with someone. You really develop a one-on-one personalized connection that's just different than when you're in a class, Again, there's more of a level of like intimacy. So I would encourage people to, if you can't work with a coach, work with a friend, work with someone that you feel really comfortable with, and just start by talking it out, talk out your stories, see what you're comfortable with. And it was like I explained to a client yesterday who I was working with. She said, well, I'm going to give you the real deal about why I started my company, but this isn't something that I would say publicly. And I said, no problem. I totally get that. I would never want you to do something that would make you feel uncomfortable. How about this alternative? Why don't we just talk about the emotions you were going through at the time? Because anyone can connect to that.
Right.
And, I think, again, I look at it as similar to acting. It's like whether you're speaking on a podcast or in a keynote speech, what people connect with is emotions. So as long as you yourself, when you're conveying your own story, you are authentically saying it in a way that people get that you're telling the truth. I think that's what really matters. So
For
I
sure.
think it's just piece by piece, and it does help to, talk it out with someone that you're comfortable with.
Right, right. I like the concept of having a coach. They can help see things from a different perspective that you don't know, you need to see them through, right? Like, it's like one time I hired this swim coach to get me ready for a triathlon, and I was swimming fine. I swam 2.4 miles in these races, and within seconds, she immediately noticed something in my stroke that saved hundreds of additional strokes over that distance. And that's saving me energy, it's saving me calories, it's saving me, and it's making me faster. And I had no idea I was making this minor mistake that she, as a coach, could immediately see. And sometimes I think as us entrepreneurs, we shy away from having that expert perspective that can see things that we know to look for, right? Or as coaches know to look for. I think, talking this out with a lot of entrepreneurs, I think in today's world, especially e-commerce businesses, the founder is usually the face of the company, right? And that means you got to be on camera, right? When we were starting Havenlock, my business partner, we were always producing video shoots, whether it was for the product or about us or founder's story. It felt like we were always in this on camera type of getting ready for the next on camera thing. And I had no camera experience. And it was a challenge for me, and still is, to kind of get through that. But, what for these brands that are up and coming? So, what do you suggest about like getting themselves on camera and to be able to tell their story, tell what they're making, their product that they're designing? Where do they start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it comes down to a couple of things. One is acknowledging the fact that it isn't natural for most people, which I try to make very clear to my clients. I mean, just to put them at ease at first, because I think especially, founders of companies or executive type personalities tend to have this bravado, which is great, and that's why they're good at what they do, but they think that they can do anything, and if they're not good at something, there must be something wrong with the situation. And it's like, well, no, I mean, there's a reason that actors are on camera or personalities are on there, because that's their thing. That's what they've trained themselves to do over time. So I think just acknowledging the fact, it was just like when I used to be terrified of public speaking, and I remember what really kind of changed my mindset around it was an interview subject said to me once. He said, well, of course you were afraid of it, because it's the most unnatural thing to do. We're used to being in a community as people, and then it's you on a stage in front of, 30 to 2,000 people. That would make anyone, feel anxious. And so I think it's giving yourself that grace, and then it's just practice.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of, and it's interesting to say this because there's such a emphasis these days, or an onus on being authentic, but truly, I think there's a healthy way to look at crafting a persona for, being on camera. And I try to encourage my clients to do that, which is, this is you, but like 2.0. So, and I think looking at it as like, this is your brand. You're not getting on there as like you, like getting out of the shower, like waking up in the morning with like your hair,
Right.
like a mess, having a cup of coffee with your husband. It's like, this is the polished version of you that is the expert. You have a ton of wisdom to share, and you have a unique story as well. And so I think having a little bit of that detachment is healthy, and then just practicing. I mean, I think developing, a delivery, a way of pacing your words, and just a way of connecting with the audience and telling stories that feels true to you. So I think it just takes reps, like anything.
Totally. Reps does help, and just kind of getting over the mental hurdle that, like, who else is going to talk about my dream? Like this is my new dream that I'm making this product or making this service. Who else is going to do it if not you, right? And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs that say, I'm just not the on-camera type. And my question is, well, who's going to be the on-camera type? And how do we get that message out in today's media world that we live in? Previously, like, you watch Mad Men, or when I went to college, it was, the standard print, radio, and 60-second TV spots, right, that were polished and produced. And you would hire actors, and you would hire, and put out photo shoots and copywriters and, designers. And that would take a long time. In today's world, we've got to be creating content in a much faster cycle. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are starting out don't realize that they are the face, and the product that they make or sell needs a face to the brand. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs say, well, somebody else is going to be the face, or that's not important. And I think that's absolutely false. I think it's super important.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I actually, it's interesting. I brought a copy of my first book because I always like to keep a copy of this with me, particularly when I'm doing interviews, because it kind of reminds me of, again, how I got my start and why I do what I do. I guess it keeps me centered. But I would say, it was really interesting because I spent, the first couple of years, even when this book came out, with people saying, "Oh my God, you're the girl that wrote that book." I didn't know that. I own that book, or I've bought several copies of it. And, people didn't really know who I was because I put so much focus on my subjects. And so for me to, kind of have my coming out, party, which I did when I was interviewed on several news stations, or when I had my first book launch, or I started doing interviews myself, was, kind of scary and sort of unnatural. But I realized, people wanted to know me. They wanted to know, why is this person so interested in getting to know members of her community? How is she the one that all of these successful people feel comfortable opening up to? Or, what made her ask such, I guess, probing questions? And so I just kind of stepped into that role. And I would say for, founders, it's like, people want to know who you are. And, I think that we live in a world where it can feel so easy to be detached from stuff. If you think about it, like, we buy most of our stuff online, or, we communicate with most people over Zoom. I'm always think about that, even people that are in the same city as me. Oftentimes I'm like a face-to-face kind of gal. So I'll say, "Hey, let's get coffee. I'll meet you at your favorite coffee shop." "No, let's Zoom." I'm like, "All right, whatever." You just go with it. But so I think to really be able to connect a person to a company, I think that is everything, these days. And I think that it's, become kind of an abnormality that, people really want to, again, feel that connection to people, whether they're in their community or it's like a household name kind of brand. And I also think that we're in a world where, things are so volatile politically. It's like people want to know they're investing their money in good companies and good people that are going to take care of others.
For sure. Certainly, when we look at starting companies, we call it the founder story. It's like, how do we tell, and maybe it's a separate page on the website or a short video about really the founder's origin. And I know you went through the takeoff program that we lead here in Nashville, but I think the second day we immediately go into, what's your origin story? Like, where were you when you identified that this problem needed to be solved and this product needed to be created? What gives you the perspective to outperform or change the status quo? What is broken? And oftentimes people, your customers, your audience, can resonate because they understand they are part of the status quo, and they also see something was broken, but you were the one to fix it. So I think a lot of people have to figure out, like, how do I get across my origin story and my brand through the founder? But I have a situation like where I started a company called Glory Light, and our target demographic is moms and grandmothers. What am I? I am not a mom or grandmother. So it's really hard as a male, and all my co-founders and my partners are also male. So we had a challenge at the very beginning of starting that brand, Glory Light. We said, "Hey, are we going to be the ones on camera trying to sell to a female, to a woman who is buying this for their kids or their grandkids?" And we said, that's not going to go over that well. So we said, well, how do we flip that script and make our customers or find other moms and grandmoms be the voice or the face of our company. And we've created like over 400 affiliates to help us do that. But we had a hurdle that we had to think through. In a lot of cases, the founder does resonate with their core demographic, their ideal customer profile, and they can talk one-to-one, right? Where we thought it would be a massive gap between, three dads, three husbands trying to sell a product to moms and grandmoms. Like, we just thought there would be a gap. So we had to think through that strategically about how we were going to address that. So I'd love to get your perspective on, from helping founders or businesses, entrepreneurs, match up their origin story and the problem they're solving with their ideal customer profile.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think before the class that I took with you, I don't think I had actually heard the term origin story before. It's so funny how like all of a sudden a term will become like really hot in business, and it's like, where did this come from? But I would say, I connected with it immediately because I thought, oh, that's what I did, for the last 17 years, helping people write their bios. It's essentially the same thing. Yep. I mean, it's just kind of a condensed version of like the bios that I used to write. So I actually did a lot of research over the weekend because I had a client who wanted help on her origin story, and she wanted, best practices for it, cool. Do's and don'ts in different settings. So whether that was, giving a keynote talk, a podcast interview, or, filming a YouTube video that she was going to put on her website, and across the board. And it was really interesting. There was quite a few articles about it, but they all essentially went back to the same thing, which is vulnerability. That's really like the key area where you can, again, connect with your customers. And then I guess, if we were speaking in business terms, we would call it a pain point. If we were just talking in normal layman's terms, it would be where I got really frustrated in life and decided to take, ownership of this issue. And so I think that wherever you can show empathy for your customers and, again, really drill into what was that moment that made me want to go after this certain issue, that's really what connects with them.
Yeah. Do you mind telling us your origin story about how you got called to kind of help entrepreneurs tell their story on camera? Like how Lily got involved?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's been a natural progression. I've had 17 years of experience as a writer. I got my start in magazine journalism, and then, quickly progressed into biographical writing because I was specialized in doing profiles for magazines. And so I right away realized I love people. I'm a people person. I really get my energy from being around people. I don't want to just do, hard news stories or like ad copy like I had done, like in bits and pieces in the past. And also it just wasn't as creative as I wanted it to be. And so I spent many, many years writing, probably close to 1,000 bios, hundreds of magazine articles, 3 books where I focused essentially on telling people's stories. And then when I got back into acting about 5 years ago and I had gotten a lot of experience doing public speaking, as a writer who was asked to speak, say, at arts organizations or universities or, even Chamber of Commerce meetings about my writing career, I just realized that, there was this great need for being well-spoken in public, but also the fact that I struggled a lot with it. I remember one time when I was in high school, I almost blacked out when I was giving a presentation in my science class because I was just so nervous being in front of, my entire class and this fear of being judged. And so I worked very, very hard on my own speaking skills. It was very helpful to listen to myself on, audio recording through doing so many interviews. So I was able to nip a lot of bad habits in the bud that I might have not otherwise been privy to because I was, essentially listening to myself all of the time. And then anytime that I was, again, in a public speaking setting, I would generally try to record it so I could watch it back.
Yep.
And I just realized that over time, it just gave me so much confidence, whether it was over coffee with someone that I was, having a client meeting with, or, I was, again, speaking to the Chamber of Commerce about what it was like to be an artist in Nashville. I felt like, again, being able to articulate my story in a way that resonated with audiences just really, again, it kind of up-leveled me in this whole new way. And so I decided that I wanted to help people be able to do that as well. And I not only to give them that confidence, but also to help their message, cut through the clutter and the noise.
Yep. It's awesome. What I heard you say, and I've been using this saying a lot, you're the most qualified person on this planet to help the person you used to be, right? And you used to be this shyer, not confident person, hadn't had the experience, hadn't had the practice, and there's someone else out there right now that's just now starting, right? And I love your origin story because you're connecting it back to these experiences, these practices, these repetitions that you've put in of filming yourself, watching yourself, and learning from that, and now helping other people figure it out who are at their start of their journey. And I love that when you're kind of like, what have I learned the last 16, 20, 25 years that can help other people? And that's a great origin story.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I it's like I said previously, it's why I have such great empathy for people that are just starting out, because I don't think it's very natural to get on camera and to share all of these, bits and pieces about your life. I know I had an intern once. I thought it was so interesting. She said, you could have a really big TikTok following if you just, filmed yourself during the day working on your various projects and gave people an inside glimpse into your life. And I thought, that's so bizarre. It's like, why would I want to do that? But I mean, it's like people are interested, and so that to me didn't feel comfortable. But what did feel comfortable, and that's another, piece of advice I often give to my clients, is do what feels good to you. You don't have to jump on the bandwagon of this is what everybody's doing. Like if you, doing a day in the life video on TikTok doesn't resonate with you, don't do it. That might be for someone else. Maybe a fashion influencer would be better equipped or suited to do that. So what felt comfortable for me was, putting little videos out on YouTube or Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook, just talking about, again, maybe what I learned in a client meeting that day, or what I had learned from an interview or something that, had come up in regards to a media coaching session that I hadn't thought about before. And I always think about something someone said to me once, which is they said, even like the little granular things that you don't find interesting, they are to people because they're not doing what you do.
For sure. Is there an interview or a project that you've done in your past that you just like changed your perspective? Like, are you really just like enjoyed it and it felt like it brought out your expertise? Any previous interviews that you've done that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I sincerely believe I get something out of every time I hear someone's story. I was talking about that actually with my mom yesterday. I was telling her about a new client that I was working with and how touched I was by just some of the stuff that she shared with me, which I mean, honestly helped me, hopefully just as much as it helped her. But I would say the projects that have been most transformative in terms of changing my perspective on the world, weirdly enough, were like the corporate projects I did, because I come from such an artsy background. I mean, I grew up with a dad who is a blues musician and a cartoonist, and a mom that, is a artist and a makeup artist. And I never knew anyone that had a day job when I was growing up. I mean, I never really met anyone that wasn't like freelance or an artist until I was maybe like in my 20s. And so I really loved some of these corporate jobs I did. I'm thinking of the 50th anniversary book I wrote for HCA, where I profiled 50 people at their company, from the founder and CEO to the doctors, janitors, nurses, security guards. Or this project I did with a wealth management firm named Alliance Bernstein, where I essentially wrote about 375 people that all had the same job, which was, their wealth managers, because it just gave me such insight into someone who could have this quote unquote, day job that maybe I never really found interesting in the past or didn't really know anything about, or quite frankly didn't think about. And to really see all of the experience, thoughtfulness, but the compassion that went into it. And, it was really interesting because particularly with those corporate projects, what I found was the end result, and I always try to explain this when I work with executives, is all of the people at the company were delighted to know a more personal side, particularly of these executives. That was really what they connected with because they're so used to seeing people at the top
Yeah.
of a company looking perfect, delivering, strategy and news and direction, and they're offering their obviously leadership skills, which is how they got into their position of power. But to have someone share their story of how they maybe grew up with a single mom who didn't have much money, and this is what really helped I guess formulate their gritty personality, or have someone who went through a really trying time, and that was really what again spurred their ambition to help other people, again, be financially stable. That's the stuff that people connect with. And so I think it was particularly gratifying to do it in the corporate world because it's so unnatural for them to show that side of themselves.
You're exactly right. It is unnatural, especially the bigger the corporation.
Yeah.
But I was working with a small 5-person team yesterday, and startup company, and they're distributed all across from Canada to the U.S. And I'm doing some vision casting and alignment synergies, like where can we find alignment and some horsepower to kind of move the company forward faster. And it's becoming such a transactional world that we live in that it's all Zoom calls, it's all meetings and work for work's sake. And as I started to interview these different founders, they didn't know the stories about the other people on the team, about
Oh, sure.
like what were their hobbies and what were their passions and what were their kids' names and what were their kids involved in. And it starts to devalue the work that they're doing, right? And
Yes.
as a team, if they all know each other and support each other and understand each other's perspectives, they start to perform better to help the team.
Yes, I completely agree. And that was one of the biggest compliments that I got when the HCA book came out, because it was really interesting. It was, initially created to commemorate their 50th anniversary, which obviously was a huge milestone in terms of, the company's history. But after it was disseminated to their, hundreds of thousands of employees, I found out later that they ended up using it as like a company culture book. I can't remember if they gave it that, name or I coined it, but I've used it ever since then. So if I lifted it, thank you, HCA. But I basically, it was to educate people that were either within the company or were, oncoming or incoming rather employees or even investors on who worked there in order to drive a deeper connection. Because I think, especially when you have a company that's 250,000 people, it's in different countries, all different states, people, that are like working on opposite sides of the coast probably very well might never meet one another. Maybe they do once a year at a conference. To read someone's story in a book or online, like I did for my digital project for Alliance Bernstein, is really powerful. And what a lot of people said was, again, it made them appreciate being in the company more. It made them, I guess, value the community more, but it also made them realize, hey, I should get up out of my cubicle and go start up a conversation with my neighbor because there's some really cool people that work at this company.
Right. Like, how would we coach someone if they were sitting here right now? Like, what's some practical things that the people watching could get from that conversation?
Sure. So when it comes to, coaching my clients on how to speak in front of the camera, which is, really what I'm trying to, I guess, carve out as my area of expertise, because that's where most of my experience has been. I would say it comes down to not just reps, but also having someone objective there who can really watch you and see maybe like little tweaks that need to be made in order to mostly make you just appear more natural. That's something that I notice a lot with my clients is the second people get a camera in front of their face, I don't know why, but it's like they tend to freeze up. Right. And I think it's because they think, oh my gosh, this is going to live on the internet forever. Even though I've had plenty of times where I was filmed on camera where I was like, oh gosh, I hate how I look in that. And like 10 people saw it and then they forget about it later. So it's not that big of a deal. Most stuff doesn't go viral these days. But a lot of it just comes down to let's go from being, uptight and nervous and, worried about saying this in like a perfectionistic way to talking to the camera like it's your friend. So I use a lot of techniques with my clients that I learned, again, through acting. There's something that a coach taught me once in acting, and I sincerely do use it on acting jobs if I'm not connecting with my, co-star, which is copy and paste a photo of a person on their face if whatever isn't working for you. So, again, I tell my clients, let's think about the person that you would want to be selling to, your ideal client, your ideal customer.
Okay.
Maybe it's, again, like a persona that we craft and speak to them rather than like a tiny little camera lens. So that would be like first and foremost the advice I would have. And then I think it just comes down to getting comfortable telling your story in different ways so it's not so canned. I've studied a lot of founder origin stories, and while the most successful companies, say the Warby Parkers of the world or the Spanx or the woman that started Orange Theory, they do tend to have the same through line throughout their story. If you hear them speaking in different settings, they kind of switch it up in a way where they make it more detailed and animated every time. So I think that just comes down to, again, let's have several different variations of how we say everything, just so, again, you don't sound like you are, reading off of a script.
Yeah. I like the concept of like the camera, whether it's a phone or a professional camera. Like think of it as like a friend, or think of it as the persona. When we had a product we were selling like during COVID on QVC. We were selling a lot of these batteries that we had produced and made. And when we were working with the QVC people, a lot of it had to do with on camera, getting prepared for the 30-second or the 60-second or the 4-minute TV basically commercial, right? And they always used her or she as like the camera, and because they're the buyer on QVC is predominantly female, so every practice session, every rehearsal, every thing that we were doing to build up the content that was going to be put on this commercial, they would use it from the perspective of she or her, 100%. She won't like that, or she won't understand that, or how do we get this across to her in a way that she will understand? Like when they were coaching us through it. And it makes me think about, I mean, in theory, they had a picture of a she or a her on the camera as if we were talking to her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, to personalize it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, and that was their demographic. So I think that's a good analogy for someone that's starting out to sell their product or service or their idea or their concept or what they're wanting to build, their vision, is think of it as their ideal customer profile. That's the camera instead.
Yes, I think that's great. And I also think that helps you figure out what they would be interested in hearing. Because I think a lot of, people get so stuck in like, well, this
What you
is
want to hear.
exactly, or, or whatever they're most comfortable talking about. But I was coaching a client recently, and, I said, let's break down who would be buying your product, because again, it's like your talking points should resonate with them. Like, while all this other stuff is super interesting and that's great, it's like, this should be all about what they want to hear, you know? And so I think, again, you coming up with that ideal customer or the person that like you want to be working with most, it's like you have to phrase things in a way where they are going to hear it automatically. And also, again, deliver wisdom or content that is going to strike enough of a chord where they go, I want to buy this, or I want to, again, employ this person's service.
Right. Are there any other tactics or practices that you take a client through to help build out their reps or get more practice to become more authentic on camera?
I think a big part of it is, as I mentioned, just being at ease on camera, because people can sense, especially, I mean, they talk about this all the time in film acting, and it's why I guess a lot of theater actors maybe struggle at first, at least, transitioning to film acting, because the camera picks up like everything. So, I mean, you don't have to be as exaggerated on camera as you would maybe be on stage. I see that a lot with people that are maybe used to speaking in like a public setting where it's like you kind of have to like bring it down a notch when you're on camera. Because again, it's almost like, especially if that camera is like right up in your face, it is literally like you're having like, a coffee conversation with someone. So I would say, you don't have to do much. All you have to do is really be at ease with yourself, because people can pick up on that right away again on camera, who is comfortable in their own skin. And that was, a big compliment that I got when I started being interviewed on camera, was everyone said, even if you are nervous, you appear like very like calm and at ease. And that immediately, I think, draws people in. So they are hearing what you have to say. I would say another thing that I really coach my clients on is pacing and delivery. I think we're, again, in a world where people just naturally talk really fast. I'm a fast talker. I am a fast talker and walker. I'm from Chicago, and it's like, man, we move like New Yorkers or LA people there. But I would say the biggest thing that I learned, and a great person to listen to, whether, you are in line with his political views or not, is President Obama. He speaks so slowly. Sometimes it's almost a little bit frustrating. I find myself like, all right, brother, let's get to the point. But he is so eloquent and articulate, and you really do process every word he says, because he says it in a way where like your ears can actually hear it. So I noticed that particularly a lot because I do listen to quite a few podcasts, particularly for research if I'm coaching my clients and how to speak on them. People just talk so fast these days, and it's like, even if they're delivering great information, it's really hard to just let it process. And so I encourage my clients, particularly if they are speaking one-on-one to the camera, or even if they're being interviewed, take a pause, take a breath, take a beat, like take a moment to like look away, off to the side. You don't have to be like going at a rapid pace the entire time. Sometimes those pauses, again, similar to acting, where, some of the best actors, they are most effective when they're saying nothing. That can be the most effective thing.
Can let that thought come in, can let that connection come into that space.
Yeah. And also, especially when you're being interviewed, I always tell my subjects, hey, sometimes if you pause, then not only does it give the other person an opportunity to jump in and ask you a great follow-up question, but you might have some sort of enlightening moment where you give your brain that rest to think of the next right thing you want to say.
Yeah, for sure. I found it really hard. Is like I'm trying to just do more on camera and get my name out there and connect with other entrepreneurs. And there's this like feeling of rushing to try to get everything into a 60 or a 90-second clip. And in business, or there's a lot of things, you just can't get into anything deep in 60 to 90 seconds. You can't frame it up right. You can't add a lot of value in 60 to 90 seconds. And that's really hard for a lot of people to think about in today's social media environment and the way that media is consumed. It's very YouTube short driven or TikTok type of driven content. I mean that in the form of the length of the video. And that's the hardest thing, is like, how do I be authentic and real, but also add value in 60 to 90 seconds?
I couldn't agree more. I struggle with it too. I filmed a series of videos recently in a, batch content way, which, is something else that I encourage my clients to do, particularly if there's someone that doesn't enjoy being on camera that much. I would encourage them to spend a day where they do their content creation and just film a whole bunch of videos at once, because you'll be in the zone. And,
Sure.
again, it's like, just having, I guess, a day reserved, it's like you can really tap into, again, that like on camera persona that I help them craft. But I would say, it's like you're giving someone a teaser, and that's why, it is really interesting that we're in this world where like we're expected to disseminate information in, multiple different platforms. So, what really helped me was realizing, okay, I'm putting something out there, it's like a little teaser, a little bite. It's like like an hors d'oeuvre or something like that, or an amuse-bouche. And it's going to be the one thing that locks someone in, hopefully for that 15-minute consultation call, or maybe they'll go and read a blog post that I wrote, or, maybe they'll want to book a session with me. That would be ideal. So I would tell people, set your expectations reasonably. You're not going to get to everything in 60 seconds. And that's why you can do follow-up videos as well. So that was, kind of the strategy that I came up with this team that I worked with was, let's put out like 15 videos where I'm like, touching on different topics. And again, less is more in a way, because that's when people want to hire you, because they again, see that what you're talking about, and they're going to come to you to get more in depth about that very topic.
Yeah. I think you're right on. I think what I have learned over the last couple of years as content and the way we consume content has changed a lot, especially for consulting, coaching, knowledge-driven based information. People don't necessarily want the education. They want to work with someone who is confirmed to have the education already, right? And you can't be a digital ghost out there. And when I first started coaching and investing and advising businesses, I didn't have a lot of content on this topic. So people, as I was talking to them, there was nothing to reference back. Do I really know what I know? Have I experienced and done the things that I'm talking about? And I was like, I'm a digital ghost. Like, yes, I had a LinkedIn profile. Yes, I'd been on Shark Tank. Yes, I'd been in all these different, Forbes and stuff. But like, on this specific topic of startups and growing startups, and investing in startups and coaching them, I had no content out there. So people were like, how do they reference that as a subject matter expertise? Even though I could educate them, they didn't want to be educated. They wanted to work with the person who had proven to have the education and experience.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess it just goes back to that age-old theory where it's like everybody has to start somewhere. And that's why, I think there's no better time than right now, for people to be entrepreneurial and put themselves out there, because I think people don't question that as much. It's like, even myself, I found myself listening to some woman on YouTube yesterday, and I didn't really know her credentials. I just found what she was talking about really interesting, and the way that she was, again, disseminating the information was really appealing, because she had the charisma and was very comfortable talking on camera. So I would say the bar is a little bit lower, but I would tell people, again, I've felt the same way when I decided to do media coaching, because it's like, even though I can, again, qualify myself for the role and say I've done, thousands of interviews on camera, and I've done, public speaking in spades and spoken on camera. It's like, well, how long have you been doing this? But again, it's like, you just have to have the confidence and the bravado to just put yourself out there and know that you know what you're talking about. And I think something I would encourage my clients, if they are looking for, a way to gain that confidence, is getting creative. I think about that in terms of like creating content. It's like getting creative and really personal with your own, area of expertise, whether it's something that drives you, or the way that you're studying, your certain path, or the people that you've worked with. If you can pull out interesting stories, again, in a way that's not going to, disclose someone's anonymity, but make it as much about you as possible. And that's how you'll break through the noise.
Very good. Anything else you want to wrap up with?
I would just love to say that, I am really passionate about helping people learn how to communicate their stories in an effective, eloquent way. I think that we live in a world where, anyone can have a podcast, anyone can put content out there, and there's something great about that. There's also something about it that kind of frustrates me, because, I guess people that have worked for years and years and years on their craft, whether it's as a public speaker, as a journalist, it's like they're not seen, I guess, again, as much of experts anymore, and because I think the bar is lower. And so I really want to help people, one, celebrate the idea of being well-spoken, and again, how this can really boost your confidence and level you up in your industry. But also, I think, to raise the bar. I listen to so many podcasts where it's like, even the host isn't particularly well-spoken, or they don't seem to put too much thought into what they're saying. And I think words are powerful. I learned that over many years of being a journalist and an author, and, writing hundreds of bios and magazine articles. I think the words we say matters. And again, we live in this era where content's king. Everyone's putting video out there these days. So I want to help people be as articulate and eloquent and thoughtful as possible when it comes to disseminating their chosen messages.
Yeah, I love your thing about repetition, because like you can't compare your first step to someone's journey, right? Someone else's journey. A lot of times we get caught in this like perfection, we get paralyzed in perfection where we don't release and take that first step. And it's taking that first step where you learn to improve, right? And if you use the podcast analogy, I think I saw a stat not too long ago that like to be in the top 60% of all podcasts in the world, in the internet, you have to create at least 2 podcasts, because 60% of people only create one and they don't proceed to the next one because they give up.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Okay.
And that just goes to show that like it's not going to come from the first at bat. You got to get up to the plate multiple times, and whether it's a podcast or it's getting on camera or creating a short or a reel or whatever, it's going to come through constant repetition. And don't expect perfect out of your first one. I think that's where I see a lot of entrepreneurs. They plan for perfect and they keep planning and planning and they never produce, or they never publish.
Yes, absolutely. I think have grace with yourself, realize there will be a learning curve. And I think just the more genuine and, again, real you are, that's what people connect to more than you sounding like, some hyper knowledgeable executive who, never makes a mistake in their entire life. So I would definitely tell people if they have one thing to focus on, it's just being at ease with themselves and focusing on the message. And it's like anything. I mean, I felt like the one message that I really hope I got across in my TED Talk was happiness comes from taking the focus off yourself. So if you just focus on the message and whatever it is that you want to teach others, that will naturally put you more at ease.
Yeah, for sure. I know it, and you've heard me say this in the Takeoff program at the Entrepreneur Center, but I have this concept called rent the room. And that forces you to rent a space, whether it's at a restaurant or any kind of assembly hall, to bring your customers or your perceived customers or anybody that has a heartbeat to come talk about the subject that you're interested in. And today, like us renting this podcast studio is a testament to like, hey, we're trying to figure this out. We're trying to put in the reps. We're trying to, but by renting the room, it forces you to show up, and it forces you to think about what you're going to do or what you're going to deliver, what you're going to talk about. And now we can either take this and we can not publish it. And we can say, oh, it's not perfect, or we could publish it and learn from it. Right. So I want everybody to think about like this concept of renting the room, filling it with people, whether it's on camera or not, and going through the motions of talking about what you're doing and getting more comfortable for the sake of building repetitions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you gave us great advice in class, which is to do practice sessions, I mean, so obviously people are busy. I mean, so you have to be respectful of their time, but whether it's, a family member, a neighbor, or, someone that you have casually met and you want to have a follow-up conversation with them, just be willing to try different stuff out there. And again, I think that's the cool thing about, creating content these days is you can throw stuff out there and see how people react to it, see what works, and kind of look at it as a big experiment. I remember one of the, greatest quotes in my first book was from an artist in town named Buddy Jackson. And he said, I don't ever try to go into a photo shoot or a painting session or whatever it is, trying to create something perfect. I actually go and try to create something really crappy. And if it ends up being really great, then I'm like pleased with it. So I would say lower the bar, lower your own expectations, just go in doing your absolute best. And, again, just know time improves all.
Lily, thanks for today.